All right, so we're here at Humber Valley Outdoor Rink. Beautiful day. We're going to be doing the transitional skating, the iTrain hockey transitional skating training intensive. And I'm going to be showing you each of the drills that we're going to be doing throughout the training intensive. So this one's stops and starts. With this one in particular, we're just focusing on really quick feet. When I tell the kids to do this drill, I tell them to do it with really quick steps, almost as if you're on one foot, then the other foot, then the other foot. You're almost on one foot the entire time, but with each one, the stop at the end should be really pronounced. So it should be a loud stop as opposed to just a step like this. So anyways, the drill is step, step, push off the stop. So with each of the kids, I tell them your main focus is, it's not a stop, but it's a spring. So spring out of the stop and start. And with each one, we also emphasize with the kids, don't just step through the crossovers, but in fact they're pushes. So push, and then stop. Push, start, stop, and start. So one last point is with the stop, I tell them it's not a stop and a start, two things, but it's a stop and start. It's one thing. So stop and start, and then spring out from that, and then continue the drill. The next drill is very similar to the last one, stops and starts, but now it stops and starts with a backwards crossover. So the only difference is, same thing that we were doing before, but through the stop turns into C-cut, and then your other leg kicks out. So same drill that we were doing before, push, stop, cut, and just very similar to like the last drill. We didn't focus on doing a stop and a start, two things. We did one thing where it was a stop and start. So the stop should actually be a stop, and then without any separation, turn into a C-cut, and then turn into a backward or outside edge backwards kick. So this is the drill. So, look at the ice. I like looking at the ice, right? So once you look at the ice, I've got a nice and thick, nice and white stop, and then there's no separation between that stop and then the C-cut, and then really quickly a nice little outside edge kick. So you're getting both legs, good strong push from both. But again, the main emphasis, nice really long and a thick stop where your whole blade is on the ice, and then boom, boom, like a quick little C-cut kick. Nice and loud, and again, very pronounced. So next drill, very basic drill, forwards to backwards to forwards. In between the neutral zone, between the blue lines, we're pivoting to backwards. So start forwards, enter into the pivot with as much speed as you possibly can. Once you hit the first blue line, the main thing is to focus on no pause in the step. So Ovechkin, Crosby, these guys are really good, strong skaters. When they pivot to backwards, there's no pause in their step. It's just immediately from forwards, immediately into backwards, and then at the far blue line, we'll just pivot right back to forwards. So check it out. The first blue line, the main focus going from forwards to backwards is you don't want to make a stopping sound like that. A stopping sound is obviously going to slow you down as opposed to speeding you up. You also don't want to step into it, so listen to my feet. You don't want to just sort of step into it, but instead we want to propel ourselves into it. So everyone knows how to do just like forward C-cuts, pushing off on the heel. So that's literally what we're doing. And then you're propelling yourself into a backwards crossover. So when we're pivoting from backwards back into forwards at the far blue line, the main focus is just to keep your feet moving and through the transition. So going from your backwards crossovers into your forwards, we sort of glide on one foot, turn your foot, make a T-push, and then immediately out of the T-push, you just explode out with really strong, aggressive forward strides. So actually listen to my skates when I pivot to forwards. So the next part of this drill is just simply the inverse of the last drill that we did. So again, forwards, we started forwards to forwards last time, and now we just start backwards. So we start backwards at the blue line, focus on gaining as much speed as you can going forwards, so the far blue, and then pivot again to backwards. The main focus is from here, so don't have the player start with just sort of basic C cuts or start forwards and then pivot to backwards, but we want to see them go from 0 to 100 as fast as they can, from starting from a stop position right into backwards crossovers. So the quickest way for us to accelerate skating backwards is to do as many crossovers as we can and max them out almost on one side of our body. So if I show it on my left leg, I'm going to get as many left leg backwards crossovers. Okay, so this one, inside edges, we call it Crosby edges at iTrain Hockey. When we're doing these edges, we're focusing on the transition from forwards to backwards and from backwards to forwards. So essentially, all I'm doing is this. I'm pushing off on my heel edge, and I'm pushing off on my toe edge, skating backwards. So to break this down, I always tell the kids, just start with your feet where your toes are spread in opposite directions. And as if you're gravitating towards the puck, don't stand here, but actually bring your knees towards it. Bring your whole body actually gravitating towards it. But essentially, you're just bouncing back and forth, forwards and backwards, forwards and backwards. The main common mistake that players make is they point their toes in the same direction, forwards or backwards. So keep your toes sort of like this, they're facing in opposite directions. And I get them just to sort of bounce. And then the next thing I tell them to do is actually transfer their weight and push into the edges. Push on the heel, push on the toe, and then if they can, actually keep their feet on the ice is the final stage. And this is a nice transition. See how much I've sort of chopped up the ice, and that's exactly what it should look like around each of the players. But again, to break this drill down, sometimes if I feel like if I see that the kids are really good on one edge and not so much on the other, then I'll just have them break it down. So the first one is an inside edge. Just get them to make a flower where your heels touch, and then by the time they're done, their toes are touched. So they actually have to curl their toe in and have some ankle flexibility. But they're pushing into the heel. Pushing into the heel. So that's the first push. And then the next time I get them to do it, they start with their toes together, push off the toe, and then actually curl their heel in. Most times when I'm teaching kids, they don't actually lift up their heel, so they don't actually pronate into the toe. So I always tell them pronate into the toe and then lift up the heel. I lift it up all the way, so literally the only thing touching the ice is actually the toe, and then your heels come together. So break it down, we'll just do this, and then maybe you got them do it forward, and then you can do almost at nearly the exact same time. Heel then toe push. So with the next drill, neutral zone pivots, we're just going around a puck or a pylon. I'm going to start at the blue, pivot at the red line, around the puck. The main thing that we want to focus on is that same sort of stop and start forwards to backwards crossover that we did before. It takes about 5 strides to get there. After you stop, it takes about 5 backwards crossovers, all on the same leg. So if I stop on my right leg, then I'm going to do 5 backwards crossovers on my right leg. So with this part of the drill, our main focus is we don't want them stepping in and going super wide. We want them going in nice and straight, and then coming out. We want them actually coming out of the pivot with on the exact same line as they came in on. A lot of players will go in and then they'll come out really, really wide, and we actually want them just to accelerate out of the pivot as if they're playing like a one-on-one against someone. And the other main focus is when I stop, watch how much snow I bring up off the ice. It should be a really loud, really aggressive stop. So listen to my stop. So next drill, we're just alternating it. Instead of going forwards to backwards, we're going backwards to forwards. We want to step in with as many backwards crossovers as we can, so we propel ourselves into the pivot. And the main focus is to open up, set up for your T-push. T-push is you're pushing as hard as you can off your back foot and then striding onto your front. And then the next thing we want to focus on is coming out of the pivot. You want to come out with a forward crossover as well. Most players, mistakenly, they'll come in, they'll do a cross, they'll pause, then they'll kind of, instead of push, they'll just step, and then same sort of thing, they pause about here, and then they step back to forwards. So just like we were saying before, Ovechkin and Crosby, they don't pause when they're pivoting from forwards to backwards, backwards to forwards, so we don't pause the exact same way. So a good stat is, one that I learned from Hockey Canada stats, is 80% of the time that you're on the ice in a shift, you're actually changing direction. So we need to be really good, really efficient as well too, at changing direction. So stage 3 of the neutral zone pivots is we're going to step in forwards and then pivot to backwards. The emphasis just being on the edges, very, very similar to the Crosby edges drill that we did before. We have 2 rips that we're focusing on. One is a forward C-cut, and then the second one's a backwards C-cut. So I almost tell the kids, I want you to jump out of the pivot. So we're gonna, most players will mistakenly on that first forward C-cut, instead of making a rip, they'll actually stop, so they'll slow into it. And then as well, so that's one thing to focus on, they both have to be on the edges, ripping into the ice. And then the backward C-cut as well too, they should actually be on one foot. So watch my skates, when I'm on one foot, and then one foot, and sort of push yourself out so that you're in a nice T-push, opened up, Crosby edges type of stance, and then launch yourself coming out of the pivot. Okay, so the final stage, so stage number 4 of the neutral zone pivots is a turn double pivot is what we call it, turn double pivot. So I'm going to start by stepping into the puck with the turn. Coming out of the turn, I cross my feet out, I pivot facing the next player in line, cross out of that, open up to forwards, and here's the double pivot. So you're pivoting one more time. So it's a turn, and then a back forwards to backwards crossover, and then a backwards to forwards crossover. Okay, so the main thing that I want trainers to emphasize is coming out of the turn at the high point right here, start with the crossover, and then you should actually jump into, coming out of the crossover, jump into the stop, and then the stop is just like any other pivot where it's 2 things combined into one, or just stop, and then start, and then push yourself out, and it's a regular backwards to forwards pivot. So watch when I actually pivot coming out, it'll actually look like I'm going to jump. Actually come off the ice, jump into it, stomp my foot down for a really loud stop, and then cross out of that. Okay, so this is one of my favorite drills to run. It's just coming out of the corner, forwards to backwards, and then back to forwards. Very smooth transition. So we literally call this drill efficient skating, so efficient pivots. There should only be 1 backwards crossover and 1 forwards crossover when doing this drill. And when we hit the hash mark and we open up and we pivot to forwards, that same C-cut that we were doing with the Crosby edges, you're throwing into that C-cut. So check it out. So a common mistake that most players make is when they're coming up to the hash mark, they make a stopping sound. So listen to my skates when they make that sound. So they pivot to backwards, make a stopping sound, and instead of the stopping sound, we want to do that rip. So that same Crosby edges type of rip. So another main emphasis is within the drill, we're not doing as many backwards crossovers as we can and as many forward crossovers as we can. It's actually just 1 backwards crossover, 1 forwards crossover, and with each one, we focus on the 6 pushes that are involved. So I'll count them out with you. So watch. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so the next one is pivot races. So we do this around a circle. I actually use pucks for pylons for this drill, but we're going to start backwards. When we hit the top of the circle, we'll pivot to forwards. Same sort of opening up, lots of crossovers coming out of each pivot. And then same thing again, we're going backwards to forwards. So just really smooth pivots. I like turning this into a race. So on one side of the circle, we'll have one player going against another player who's on the other side of the circle, and they can race each other, and it should be competitive. You can do it once through, or you can do it twice. So there, back, or you can do it there, back, and then last one to stop on that 4th stop, they win the race. All right, next one's called the Andrew Taylor Special. Andrew Taylor's one of our past iTrain hockey pro trainers, and he developed this drill, awesome drill, constantly pivoting and coming out with, instead of a regular forwards to backwards pivot, we come out of the pivots with like a bit of a tight turn out. Part of this drill is the tight turn out. After you come out of the pivot, we do a tight turn. The nearest boards to me are on that side. Once I pivot, so when I pivot, I aim the tight turn that way. So on the back side, I turn. Next time I step out with some crossover, pivot, and I'll turn the other direction. So lead with your stick, and then tight turn out. One main emphasis, one common error is that kids will, instead of doing a tight turn, they'll do like a spinorama. So they'll just kind of do this and do a spin as opposed to an actual tight turn. All right, next one, it's just a basic forwards to backwards and then back to forwards pivot. The only thing with this one is you're stepping in with a ton of speed because you're starting at the blue line. So start at the blue, we always face the net when we pivot to backwards and then pivot back to forwards with as much speed as we can. Always come back to where you started, so just like this. All right, for this one, this is Henry Fung Races, is the name of this drill. So we're just going around the circle. I'm going to be demonstrating it just as one person, but my partner would be across the ice, on the other side of the ice, doing the exact same thing.